To her neighbors, 3-year-old Cassidy Sakalusis was a happy-go-lucky toddler who lit up their day with a smile and a wave. But her mom was like a stage with a cheerful set facing the street. Behind the curtain, a completely different, horrifying story was playing out. This is a story of a child's innocent world and how it was shattered by the one person who was supposed to be her lighthouse, the person who instead guided her into a storm. On the 1400 block of Orson Drive, a quiet street on the south side of Columbus, Ohio, the brightest light wasn't a porch lamp. It was a 3-year-old girl named Cassidy. Neighbors knew her well. They saw a vibrant, joyful child, full of life and always quick with a smile. One neighbor, Richard Gray, described her as happy-go-lucky for sure. He remembered how she would run around the neighborhood, often with her mother, and always made it a point to say hello. She says hello to me. She runs up to my door, he said, painting a picture of a sweet, outgoing little girl. Other neighbors like Tristan and Darian Price also knew Cassidy. They had even babysit her a few times. They got to know the little girl who loved Scooby-Doo and who had just dressed up as a unicorn princess for Halloween. To the outside world, Cassidy's life looked like a perfect family photograph. The Prices saw her, Richard Gray saw her, and others saw her walking with her mother almost every day. They say what looked like a mother trying to be a good parent, a normal family going about their lives, but that friendly image hid a dark secret, like a beautiful painting with a monstrous figure hidden in the shadows. That picture of the happy-go-lucky toddler who's about to be broken in the most horrific way imaginable. And those same neighbors who loved her, cheerful hellos, would soon be standing on their lawns, staring at flashing police lights and trying to understand the evil that had been living right next door. While 41-year-old Sharon Sakulos was seen walking with her daughter every day, looking like a devoted parent, some neighbors couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It was like hearing a single sour note in an otherwise pleasant song. The Price family who lived nearby started picking up on what they called weird energy. They felt that Sharon and her child were, in their words, extremely off. Their interactions left them feeling unsettled. They noticed Sharon would sometimes overstay her visits and seem to neglect Cassidy, constantly asking them to babysit. Her constant requests felt less like a neighbor asking for a favor and more like someone who owned a precious flower but kept asking everyone else to water it. This unease wasn't just a gut feeling. It was rooted in a pattern of behavior that hinted at serious problems, and it turns out there had been more official warnings, like a distant alarm bell that had been silenced long ago. After the tragedy, Franklin County Children's Services confirmed they weren't actively involved with the family when Cassidy died. However, they revealed their last contact had been over a year and a half earlier. The agency is now reviewing that file, but the fact that there was any history at all raises troubling questions. What was the fire that set off that first alarm? And what was done to put it out? We don't have the answers yet. What we know is that a year and a half after the system's last check-in, the fire was still smoldering inside the house, and Cassidy was left alone with the person who would ultimately betray her. The police investigation would soon uncover a confession so disturbing, it chilled even seasoned officers to the bone. If you believe every child's story deserves to be heard, take a moment to subscribe so we can continue to bring awareness to these critical cases. New Year's Eve is supposed to be about hope and celebration, but on December 31st of 2025, on Orson Drive, any sense of celebration was about to be destroyed by the sound of sirens. Around 5:30 in the evening, as dust settled over the neighborhood, everything changed. Richard Gray was in his car when he saw it. Out of nowhere, I just see 10 flashing lights, he said. So I'm sitting in the car and I'm like, what's going on? Neighbor Tristan Price saw it too. Yeah, we seen the cops pull up and they beeline straight to the door, pretty much kicked the door in. The urgency was clear. Police flooded the scene. their actions swift and desperate. A 911 call had came in reporting a child who wasn't breathing. Inside, first responders found 3-year-old Cassidy unresponsive. They immediately started resuscitation, working frantically to save her. As the chaos unfolded outside, an officer approached the Prices, who were watching in horror. Darian Price remembers the officer's grave words. He's like, I don't know if you guys pray, but definitely say some prayers today. The neighbors having babysit Cassidy before made a hopeful offer. They told the officers, we can watch the baby if mom's going to jail. The response they got was heartbreakingly final. And they said, she's going to the hospital. She's gone. Cassidy was rushed to the nationwide children's hospital, but it was too late. Just 30 minutes after police had first arrived at 6:06 p.m., Cassidy Sakulos was pronounced dead. And where was her mother, Sharon? As her daughter was inside, taking her last breaths, and as paramedics desperately tried to save her, neighbors saw Sharon standing outside. Tristan Price described the chilling scene. The ambulance came, and she was standing there smoking a cigarette. He said she was standing kind of stoic and calm. She wasn't behaving like a mother whose world was collapsing. She stood there like a detached spectator, watching a building get demolished. Another neighbor simply called her reactionless. While her 3-year-old daughter was dying, her protector stood by, seemingly unfazed. Wrapped in a cloud of smoke, as Tristan Price put it, she was like way too calm. As the tragic news about Cassidy settled over the neighborhood, the Columbus Division of Police began their investigation. It didn't take long for them to realize this was no accident. The preliminary findings were clear. This was a homicide, with a motive, police said, rooted in domestic violence. The investigation quickly focused on the only other person in the house, Cassidy's mother, Sharon Sakulos. When detectives interviewed her, the horrifying truth came out. Sharon confessed. Court documents later laid out the chilling details. She told investigators she had placed a plastic bag over her daughter's head and held it there until the little girl stopped moving, until she was completely unresponsive. This wasn't a pot left to boil over on the stove. This was a deliberate act of arson. An affidavit filed in court was brutally explicit. Sharon said her intention was to kill her daughter when she placed the bag over her head. She hadn't just made a mistake, she had gathered the kindling and struck the match. The preliminary report confirmed the cause of death was suffocation. The court documents also know that Cassidy had visible bruises, a silent treatment to the violence she may have endured even before those final horrific moments. The child her neighbors knew as happy-go-lucky had died in an unimaginable terror at the hands of her own mother. Following her confession, Sharon Sakulos was arrested and charged with murder. She was booked into the Franklin County Jail and held on a $2 million bond, awaiting her first court appearance. The woman who some had seen trying to be a good parent was now behind bars, accused of the ultimate betrayal. The news hit the residents of Arson Drive like a physical blow. It just didn't make sense. How could the smiling, waving little girl they saw every day be the victim of such a monstrous act? Each house on their street was like a book, and they all could see was the cover. They never imagined the story next door was a horror. The shock quickly turned to grief and disgust. It's kind of traumatizing, said Tristan Price, echoing how the whole community felt. Richard Gray, the neighbor Cassidy would run to greet, was left struggling with how senseless it all was. I feel like nobody deserves to die at that age, for sure, he said before adding, dang, that's crazy. People are crazy. His words captured the raw disbelief that a life so young could be extinguished with such cruelty. The image of a mother walking her child every day was now forever slashed, revealing a monstrous reality underneath. The community was left to grapple with the horrifying truth that you never really know what's happening behind your neighbor's door. Sharon Sakulos was scheduled for arraignment on the morning of January 2nd, 2026. Facing a murder charge, she was assigned to a public defender. As her case begins, it's a slow journey through the justice system. Police have encouraged anyone with more information to come forward. The story is still developing, but for the neighbors on Orson Drive, the damage is done. The memory of flashing lights and a little girl who was gone will now forever be part of their community's story. This case of Sharon and Cassidy Sakulos is now in the hands of the court. Sharon is facing the most serious charge possible, and the legal process will decide her fate, but no verdict can undo what happened. No court proceedings can bring back the vibrant little girl at the heart of this story. This case forces us to look at the darkness that can hide behind a normal-looking front door. It shows how vulnerable children are and the devastating consequences when the sacred trust between a parent and a child is violently shattered. You also have to wonder about the system. When an agency like Franklin County Children's Services has prior contact but there is no longer involved. It's like discovering a hole in a vital safety net. You have to ask if a child slipped through a gap that no one saw until it was far too late. But when you strip away the police reports and the court dates, you're left with the story of a little girl named Cassidy. A little girl who loved Scooby-Doo and dressed up as a unicorn princess. A little girl her neighbors called Happy-Go-Lucky. Let's remember her that way. Not as a statistic, but as a bright, joyful soul who ran up to her neighbors' doors and brought a little bit of light into their day. The ultimate tragedy is that the one person who should have cherished that light the most chose to extinguish it forever. If you or someone you know is struggling, or if you ever suspect a child is in danger, please know that resources are available. Reaching out can make all the difference. The story of Cassidy Sakulos is a heartbreaking reminder of what's at stake. May she rest in